Because I didn't start watching Fire Country until April 25th, 2025, I'm one of those people for whom Gabriela Perez has never actually been a main character. Don't get me wrong, she was a main character for the 3 seasons of this show. I religiously binge-watched in summer of 2025, but I've always known she wasn't coming back because her departure was announced during the post-season 3 interviews. The writers, of course, also decided to write Vince out, finally cashing in on 3 years of foreshadowing that he would die as a result of his trauma and Bodhi being unable to save him. His death surged Vince's popularity and it remains high to this day. Gabriela, though, was a different story. Certainly, one portion of the fandom are incredibly pissed that she was written off. They are told that Gabriela and Bodhi are a love story, and there were and still are demands for her to be brought back and to be with Bodhi, with people saying her being written out proves that she was only ever Bodhi's love interest, never mind the fact that she was only his primary love interest for 20 episodes, and of those they only actually dated for 12. But only half the fandom wants her back. There's another half that I frequently see on Reddit, who are very happy that she's gone because they hate her. They have a long list of complaints about why she sucks, and essentially it comes down to her having wronged every single male character except for Vince. The problem, though, is that while Gabriela is certainly not perfect, none of the characters on the show are, I feel like fandom media has a way of remembering Gabriela in a way that's very generous to the men around her and very ungenerous to her. So today what I want to do is look at some of the most common myths and add all the context around them. I think the best way to do this is going to be to take each criticism and look at it in chronological order, to add the necessary context to each alleged criticism. I'm not going to say Gabriela has never done anything wrong, but I am going to say that people apply criticism to her in a way that they would never apply to Bodhi and certainly not to Jake. This is really the only way we can look at what is actually going on. And then I'll make my point about my thoughts about Gabriela, which I always do at the end of these essays. So I think the origin of this is maybe things being muddled in those first 8 episodes of the show. Because it certainly is the case that Bodhi is having sexy dreams about her when she's dating Jake, and she is also developing feelings for Bodhi during that time frame. Yet, eventually she breaks it off when she realizes that she couldn't keep debating her feelings about Bodhi while attached to Jake. I already talked about this in Gabriela's essay, but it's worth going over again here. Bodhi and Gabs meet in the pilot, but I wouldn't even call them acquaintances. He knows who she is because they saw her Olympian gets the key to the city ceremony, and she knows he's an inmate. That's about it. At the top of Fresh Prince, Jake says Eve saved him, and Gabriela again sees Bodhi later that day when she was teaching diving classes that were interrupted by the lightning storm. She ends up going off to find the hose and helps Bodhi fight the fire. During that fire, Bodhi sees how badly Manny treats her, and she sees how bad Vince treated Bodhi. Then she goes off with Jake after the fire and dances with him at Smokey's. They don't see each other in Where There's Smoke, and they next see each other in Work Don't Worry when she's grabbing a med bag for Sharon. Bodhi says Sharon must really like her if she's taking Gabs on a ride-along. Later, when Gabs finds out that Manny asked Sharon to push her out of Cal Fire, Gabs calls Bodhi to complain about both their parents. It's clearly not romantic, as she is literally talking about getting home to Jake and just needed a second to calm down with a friend. She also tells Bodhi that Vince is recovering well. Bodhi calls to wish her good luck and get some be safe, though Jake declines the call. Jake later confronts her about this, and she says they're just friends, with Jake telling her Bodhi is a bad person. During the rescue, Manny picks on her, with Jake taking Manny's side, and at the end of the episode, Gabs makes her first illegal trip out to Three Rock to explain that Jake declined the call. This is the first time they are definitely crossing boundaries, but apparently not according to Bodhi, as he calls Jake in the next episode to say they're just friends. However, Jake insists to Eve that Bodhi is intentionally pissing him off, something Bodhi himself is in denial about until he sees Jake is actually upset. Then at the end of the episode, having previously promised his parents he would stop causing shit with Jake, he tells Gabs they can't be friends because it's over the line. They don't talk in Happy to Help, and while they do talk in Bad Guy, it is entirely about work. When Bodhi falls off the bridge, we see in No Good Deed that she jumped after him. She tells him it was because he jumped in the car to save Sam, though Meg greatly doubts this is the only reason. When Gabriela passes out, Bodhi Princess carries her to safety, and he promises to call her every day she's in the hospital, which pisses Jake off. It seemed like he was going to break up with her at the end of the episode, though they're still together and get your hopes up. While treating a burn victim, a patient commended Gabriela on her decisiveness, which motivates her into breaking it off with Jake because she feels like she's leaving him hanging while she deciphers her feelings about Bodhi. Mama Bear helps her make up her mind, though, because she sees Bodhi chase after and beat up a guy who tried to kill Sharon. That's enough for her to decide not to be with him. However, one episode later, Freddy does his best impression of Frozen's fixer-upper in 2 pink lines, and Gabs decides that Bodhi is growing while in prison and will hopefully become the person she needs him to be when he gets out. So overall, Gabriela did keep dating Jake when she had feelings for Bodhi. Kinda. She clearly was in denial and didn't see that denial as cheating on Jake. But with the help of her discussion with the business owner, she decides that it's unfair to him if she is wrestling with these feelings while still dating Jake. She does get together with Bodhi, but not really till the end of 2 Pink Lions, and her statements suggest that they're going to work on themselves so they're ready to be in a relationship when he gets out, suggesting that this is a conditional togetherness, not a commitment and not jumping from relationship to relationship as people often claim. So there are like a million versions of this tale, but they all involve some version of Gabriela moved on too quickly, and yes, I will admit that Gabriela did start dating Diego approximately 2 months after Bodhi broke up with her. We know that the events of Something's Coming take place roughly 6 months after I Know It Feels Impossible, but we don't know if this is exactly 182 days. We just know that they've been together for about 4 months. I actually feel like the primary place this claim comes from is people misremembering the events of the season 1 finale and the season 2 opener. Because if you look at the actual events, there is absolutely nothing to suggest this idea that Gabriela was in the wrong here. At the end of Backfire, Gabriela breaks into 3 Rock to have sex with Bodhi 2 days before he's supposed to get out. At the end of the episode, she's having severe anxiety that he won't, largely spurred on by losing a patient who was supposed to be going on a date the day he died, and she decides not to wait to be happy. The next day, they work to mudslide together, and it's quite clear to everyone that he thinks he's getting out. However, the day after, when faced with the idea that the state's attorney's office believed there were 2 drug rings at 3 Rock, and it seemed like Freddy was hiding Sleeper's drugs in exchange for access to his cell phone, Bodhi is faced with either getting out and letting the state try to assemble enough evidence that points to him being a drug dealer, and Freddy most likely being discovered as having participated in the drug ring, or confessing to protect Freddy, and Bodhi does the latter. This is when we see Gabriela running to Bodhi, begging for answers, and he tells her to go away, build a life without him, and forget about him. We find out in Something's Coming that she did not do this. Instead, she wrote him a stack of letters and tried visiting him, but he refused contact. He was also refusing to return Manny's letters and only saw Manny because Vince tricked him into it. Towards the middle of Something's Coming, we find out that she's been dating her trainer, Diego. In real life, this would be a serious problem, but Sharon and Vince are each other's bosses for the entire time that he's alive, so maybe in Fire Country World this isn't a big deal. Regardless, we know they've been together for 4 months when Diego asked Gabriela to marry him, and it's not clear if there's any overlap between her letters to Bodhi and her dating Diego. But we should really also be taking issue with this concept that she was going to wait for him forever. Because, well, that's never even implied once. She was waiting for him to make parole. Throughout those last 6 episodes of season 1, he tells Gabriela over and over again that he might not get out, and she refuses to hear it. She repeatedly treats parole like evidence that Bodhi is reformed and safe, so the idea that she promised to wait for him forever to get his act together is just untrue on its face. And maybe you're not a fan of that. Maybe to you, true love is waiting around while your boyfriend gets his shit together despite him being in jail, and that's okay, you do you. But at no point in time was that what Gabriela was stated to be doing. In addition, not only was Gabriela the one broken up with, she tried to maintain contact, and how long do you continue to send people unreturned letters? How many times do you show up at the prison trying to see them before you decide to move on? Is it possible that Diego took advantage of her heartbreak? Absolutely, but I'm not necessarily sure that the text implies something one way or the other on that. So I included this one not because it's false, but because I think there is way too much being ignored about Fire Country Season 2 to not include this. When Bodhi gets back to Three Rock, she does have a moment where they make eye contact. Then they talk again and breathing again, the first time Bodhi works a fire in 7 or 8 months. Bodhi spends some of that time rubbing it in Sharon's face that he cared more about Freddie than her. Then he complains to Gabriela that his mom isn't super happy to see him. Gabs makes it clear they are angry because Bodhi made choices that impacted them, didn't even consider how they would feel about it. By the end of the episode, though, Bodhi tells Gabriela there's a girl in his life that's all he can think about, and she gets kinda jealous because there's a part, or maybe more than a part, of her that wants that too. In general, throughout season 2, Bodhi is constantly either making eyes at Kara or making eyes at Gabriela, and that kinda comes to a head in Too Many Unknowns. In that episode, Bodhi goes into a chemical plant, gets blown up, and wakes up in the med tent. When he awakens, he tells Gabriela he loves her, and that doesn't go over well with Diego, who is standing right there. Later in The Storm Will Pass, Jake tells Sharon and Vince that Bodhi might be Jen's father, which is why Jake isn't sure about proposing to Kara. Gabriela is immediately relieved to find out that the girl he can't stop thinking about is Jen, not some other woman. Then at Kara's funeral, Gabs has a brief conversation with him about Jen. The next time we get Bodiella stuff is in It's Not Over, where Roberta, desperate to learn more about her daughter, starts interviewing everybody she can find. It's hard to say what exactly was the turning point that turned her from Team Diego to Team Bodhi, but Bodhi does admit that he hurt Gabriela and he wants her to be happy with Diego. While Gabriela does yell at her mom for saying she thinks Gabriela should weigh feelings about Bodhi and Diego, I can't help but wonder if this is because someone who, in Gabriela's estimation, barely knows her, is able to be more decisive about what she wants than Gabriela herself. Throughout this whole period, Vince and Gabriela have started conspiring to hide Vince's heart condition from Sharon. As a result, Gabriela is also hiding it from Bodhi, and that peaks in No Future, No Consequences when Vince almost dies. Bodhi is incredibly pissed off at Gabriela for not telling anyone what was going on with Vince, and after Vince is saved, the two of them have an argument. Gabriela screams that he hasn't been the best either and reveals that she's still angry that he just up and left without telling her what happened or giving her any sort of proper resolution. Then, and only then, did they kiss. And in the spirit of being as non-biased as possible, I'll admit that she did kiss him, not the other way around. In the next episode, she's not told anyone that she kissed Bodhi. Diego offers to postpone the wedding since Manny is currently a fugitive from justice, but Gabriela presses ahead anyway. She does confide in Eve that she kissed Bodhi, but when she's weighing out the two men, she says Bodhi is offering romance and Diego is offering a life. And when you stack those two together, it's not really a choice. Except, apparently it is, because at the end of What the Bride Said, she tells Diego she doesn't want to get married anymore. Actually, what she tells Diego is remarkably similar to what she told Jake, which is basically that her feelings about Bodhi are unresolved, so she can't make him wait while she figures her stuff out. Though you have to admit all the evidence does suggest Bodhi intended to break up her wedding. Specifically that he intended to go talk to her before she married Diego, but Manny intercepted him. Later, when she was trying to get married, this dude literally sits in the second row on her side where she can see him, then in the middle of vows just walks out. So did he make that decision for her? No, but he certainly encouraged it. I've never actually seen where she blames Bodhi for her life falling apart, so I think that this claim is just specifically referencing what Gabriela says to him in the season 3 episode Firing Squad. Fresh off of being set free of Jake's power trip where he decided he was in charge of discipline for them, Bodhi and Gabriela get in her car and drive far away where they can talk freely. The dream of being a firefighting couple is within reach, but Gabriela says she doesn't want it. Instead, she recalls all the crazy shit she did in furtherance of her relationship with Bodhi, like breaking into 3-Rock multiple times and stealing keys so they can have sex, and comes to the conclusion that they shouldn't be together. Very specifically, that they're gonna burn each other's lives down if they don't stop. It's very important here that everything she's mentioning is her choice. Is that she's afraid of who she becomes when she's dating Bodhi, so she decides not to date him. Or does she? It's only 2 episodes later, after being trapped in an elevator with Manny, and I'll talk about why that was a problem in a minute, that she decides, fuck this, actually I want to have commitment-free sex. Cue a very racy sex scene that does not give me any of the feels of their season 1 scene. So I know I already talked about this in my intro, but Bodhi and Gabriela actually only stay together for 2 episodes. Edgewater's about to get real cozy and Not Without My Birds. We don't know how much time takes place between these episodes. It could be a few weeks or a few months, but what we do know is that Bodhi and Gabs have sex in Vincent Sharon's Airstream 3 times in 1 week, so there must be at least a week between these episodes. Bodhi asks what their future is, and Gabriela says we don't have a future, not right now. And then, and this is very important, he says, okay, I can wait for you. During that episode, Gabriela is triaging patients at Smokey's after a plane crash when she snaps at one and Vince pinches her. When she gets back to the station, she asks Bodhi to have sex in the Airstream, which he doesn't do because he's supposed to be working. Then, in typical Fire Country fashion, they don't have to finish this conversation because a fire starts. That fire was caused by a guy who was banned from vaping, and so he decided to smoke weed. The weed started a fire and he was kicked out of the station, which causes him to take refuge in the Airstream. Gabriela finds him, they're screaming, and pretty soon everyone knows she's living in the Airstream instead of just the Leones, including Manny, who wasn't supposed to find out. Manny tells her to let someone in, and she says nothing when he has to go back to prison, since, this is season 3. Later, Bodhi asks her to come sit with him at Smokey's, and she says no. But you know who does end up sitting with him at Smokey's? Audrey. So this is not an Audrey hate video. I actually prefer Audrey to Bodiella, but I wanted to point out that while Bodhi is allegedly supposed to be trying to date Gabriela, he is also seemingly pursuing Audrey. Bodhi announces that he's going to house sit for her, which Gabriela didn't know, and then when they watch the eagles hatch, Audrey grabs his arm in excitement. Gabriela is not impressed. During that episode, Bodhi's trainer, Camden Casey, spends a lot of time basically telling him he's going to be a shitty firefighter if he cares about his family, this being in direct opposition to Vince, whose entire model of being a firefighter is doing everything because he loves his community. Don't worry, there will eventually be a Hotel Edgewater edit about it. At the end of the episode, Bodhi gives her an ultimatum. Either the relationship continues on his terms, which includes a physical and emotional relationship, or they break up. When Gabriela asks for time, he says he's done. So what's really important here is, yes, Gabriela did want a physical relationship. She made that clear from the beginning. There was no question about what she wanted, and that what she wanted was something that didn't require emotional commitment, but did involve fun. Bodhi didn't want that, which is allowed. It's his body, after all. But it goes both ways, and the problem isn't that the relationship should or shouldn't have been just physical. The problem is that Gabriela made it clear that she didn't want an emotional relationship. And he said okay for 1.5 episodes, then demanded an emotional relationship. Maybe you believe that a relationship needs both, and that's okay. But Gabriela set the terms of the relationship from the beginning, and Bodhi agreed to those terms, then backed out, which hurt her. I think this point comes specifically down to the conversation between Gabriela and Manny that they have in the park bathroom in Coming In Hot, and then they basically strip it of all the context so that it's just that conversation. Gabriela does say she drank because Manny drank, specifically because she was in pain and she didn't know what to do. So she thought what Manny did must have worked, that's why he kept doing it over and over again. I don't want to rehash every single thing that Manny does in Season 2 and the top of Season 3. Again, I promise it's coming. But instead, I want to look at a few key moments. In the Season 2 episode, It's Not Over, Manny punches Luke, something that people forget Gabriela does not support in the slightest. She yells at him that day for punching Luke, and during the campaign fire, she yells at him because they believe he's going to end up getting fired. Luke makes good on his promise to Sharon to protect Manny's job, but Manny ends up with charges against him. Then, because Manny went on the run instead of going to court, he ends up getting arrested at Gabriela's wedding. She doesn't find out until she's already been bailed out of ditching Diego at the altar by a helicopter crashing into the church, making a very bad day worse. An episode later, Manny gets angry at Gabriela for not sticking around for his arraignment to listen to what happened. She says it's hard to hear him get arraigned over something that was nothing more than an impulsive act from someone who is supposed to be doing better. Manny turns this into an opportunity to berate her for making the decision to break off her engagement with Diego. He says she was raised better and should have made the decision when Diego pulled out the ring instead of waiting until the last minute. But it's really hard to break off an engagement everybody knows about for someone you're not even sure if you want to be with. It's at this point we can get around to her walking into the fire. After Sharon had some very bad parenting interventions, Gabriela had drunken sex with Jake. I'll talk about that eventually too. The very next episode ends with Gabriela siphoning off gas from a car they broke the windows out of, and Jake yells at her that she has no real problems. He's the only one with real problems since Kara died and Jen decided she didn't want to live with him anymore. That's when Gabriela takes off her radio and jacket and tries walking to Edgewater, walking straight into a fire. Manny hears that Gabriela is gone, and instead of alerting Eve, Jake, or anybody else, he decides to run after her. That's how we get to the bathroom scene where Gabriela yells at him for breaking the law by coming after her, largely because she's afraid he's going to get himself sent to actual prison. This ends up being a turning point of sorts in their relationship in Season 3, as after this, Gabriela is dedicated to helping him earn credits for parole. She also routinely starts coming to see him again, and they are basically on good terms for the rest of the season, with the exception of him victim blaming her for nearly getting kidnapped, but that's neither here nor there. Oh boy, Season 3 is going to be a complicated season when I get around to it. Okay, I am willing to give anybody who said this in the week between Goodbye for Now and Not Astray a pass because we didn't know how Audrey felt or what she knew about the relationship between Bodhi and Gabs. However, the second Not Astray was finished was the second that the Smiths should have died. Yes, it is true that Gabriela took care of Bodhi after Vince's death. During this same time, Manny was taking care of Sharon, Luke was seemingly taking care of Walter, and Jake and Eve were taking care of each other. Audrey wasn't there, but this is specifically because Audrey was dealing with the fallout of shooting Finn, and she went to go be taken care of herself by someone who didn't just lose somebody very close to them. Bodhi tries to use Gabriela taking care of him as a way to push Audrey away. However, Audrey makes it very clear that she knew everything going on between Bodhi and Gabriela, or at least the large extent. That's why when Bodhi says he and Gabriela got close again, Audrey isn't offended or betrayed. She yells at him for trying to push her away. I do think this is that thing where people pretend like women can't be friends. These two have pretty explicitly been friends since at least Fare Thee Well. Audrey protected Gabs by shooting Finn, Gabs was keeping Audrey very up to date with Bodhi, and Audrey kinda implies she wouldn't be opposed to being in a romantic relationship with Gabriela. People think it's weird that they are friends considering they used to date the same guy, and I'm like, honey, that's just how small towns work. In no way was Audrey threatened by what Gabriela was doing. Claiming otherwise is imposing worldviews on characters they themselves do not hold. The idea that Gabriela was intentionally trying to break up Bodhi and Audrey is absurd. She does have feelings for him. She does tell him that. but there's no reason to think she is trying to break them up. Quite the opposite, as she acknowledges that they can't do anything about their feelings right now because Bodhi is in another relationship. Every one of these summer videos I'm making, with the exception of the Ending Explained videos, have come with an explanation of why I decided to do this video, and again, this video is no exception. While I usually say the trio of Vince, Sharon, and Luke are my favorite characters, Gabriela is someone who I also adore. Actually, I don't think I realize how much I miss her until I do anything that talks about her. While the fandom seems to love making her the resident love interest to any number of male characters, she has a substantial life outside romance with Sharon, Vince, Manny, and Audrey. With Vince dead and me working my way through season 2 right now, I actually really miss the relationship between those characters, and I'm sad that it's not here anymore. I know you're probably tired of hearing me talk about misogyny, but I think how Gabriela is treated by the fandom is largely a byproduct of misogyny, and what we expect of women on TV. Gabriela is a female character who does something other than support her fandom-assigned men without question, but I cannot ignore how often a wrong order of events is integrated into the fandom understanding of her. More and more, though, I am willing to attribute this to misremembering events, especially since I've had my own circumstances where people I know and respect their opinions of the show misremember events, and then I have to remind them of exactly what had happened. And I think maybe this is the difficulty of a show like Fire Country. If I had a question about what happened in Has Been Hotel or Hell of a Boss, I could easily go read the wiki and see an interpretation. There are also so few episodes and scenes that I can go and watch that scene for myself. However, I'm like 10 plus watches into Fire Country, and whenever I write these videos, I still have to go back and watch scenes because I forget things. I do have a way that I can search for specific lines when I'm thinking of them, but I'm not going to share that because I'm not entirely sure I should. It's just the difficulty of falling in love with a show that doesn't have a fan base that maintains a massive wiki or TV tropes page. We are officially at the part of the video where I start foreshadowing the next video. However, I am making this video at the beginning of July, and you're seeing it in the middle of August. I had planned to stop making videos 1 month before the Fire Country premiere so I can focus on my season 2 essay series. And I don't know when that's going to be yet because CBS hasn't announced it. I do have a plan to remake a very important video of mine, but if we find out Fire Country is coming back in mid-September and not mid-October, you won't be able to see that until after the season 5 finale. So take care, and I may have a new video for you soon. We'll see.